So what if I told you a band made of rock royalty with a guaranteed #1 hit was called a miserable, painful mistake by its own singer? They had everything. The fame for bands like Journey and the Babies, the big budget videos, the perfect hair, the power ballad that owned the radio. But behind the scenes, it was a five-man civil war fueled by ego and resentment. Here's how a supergroup dream became a waking nightmare.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.
So picture this. It's the late 80s. The rock world is dominated by hair, leather, epic guitar solos. Arena rock is king. And in this world, two gigantic bands are on a break. First you have Journey. They'd spent years as one of the biggest bands on the planet, but by 1987, frontman Steve Perry was done, and the band went on hiatus. Guitarist Neal Schon and keyboardist Jonathan Cain, the guys who wrote a ton of those massive hits, were itching to do something new. They had the magic formula for writing stadium anthems, but they needed a voice. Then you have John Waite. This guy had his own string of successes. He was the frontman of the Babies, another big-time rock act. Then he went solo and scored a massive #1 hit with Missing You. He had what it took. The voice, the look, the frontman swagger. So some record executive thought, what if we put them all together? On paper, it was a license to print money. You take the instrumental engine of Journey and pair it with the charismatic voice of John Waite. To round it out, they grab another guy from Waite's past, bassist Ricky Phillips, also from the Babies. And for the drums, they find this young powerhouse named Dean Castronovo, a guy Schon had been working with. It was a supergroup, and the term implies something epic, something bigger and better than the sum of its parts even. And they call themselves Bad English. The name supposedly came from a game of pool, where John Waite and his friends were playing poorly and somebody joked about putting too much English on the cue ball, making things spin out of control. Turned out to be a prophetic name. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Here are these seasoned rock veterans, all masters of their craft, coming together to create this monster. The record label, Epic Records, threw a mountain of cash at him. They knew this was a can't-miss project. The band gets in the studio, they start writing. The sound is exactly what you would expect. Big, glossy, polished arena rock. Sean's guitars are soaring. Cain's keyboards add that lush, cinematic feel. Waite's voice with that signature raspy passion is right up front. And of course, that rhythm section is locked right in behind them. Their self-titled debut album comes out in '89, and it's an immediate hit. The first single, Forget Me Not, is this solid rocker that does well. But then comes that second single, When I See You Smile. And this is where the story starts to get complicated. When I See You Smile wasn't written by the band. It was actually penned by Diane Warren, a legendary songwriter who was basically a hit factory. I had the time of my life. She wrote power ballads for everyone. The song was pure, uncut, lighter in the air gold. It was slow, it was emotional, it had a huge chorus. It was everything radio wanted in 1989. It went straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Freaking monster. The music video was everywhere on MTV. It showed the band performing live, looking like rock gods, with Waite connecting with the crowd. Sold the idea that Bad English was this unified force, this incredible live band that could also make you feel all those feelings. So they're on top of the world, the album selling millions, their arena headliners, everything going according to plan. But here's the thing. While the world saw this massive success, inside the band, the cracks were already showing. And that #1 hit, it was part of the problem. John Waite, the rock and roll frontman, never really liked that song. He saw himself as a serious artist, a rock singer, and here he was fronting a band whose biggest hit was this super soft power ballad written by an outside songwriter. In his mind, it made them look like a corporate product, not a real gritty rock band. He felt it was sappy. Neal Schon and Jonathan Cain, on the other hand, had come from Journey. They knew how to make hits. They knew what it took to fill the stadiums. A #1 song was a #1 song, man. Sappy sells. Who cares? Who even cares who wrote it? And this created a fundamental tension. Was Bad English a real band with its own identity, or was it a vehicle for the Journey guys to keep making Journey-style music, but with a different singer? John Waite started to feel like a hired gun. He felt like he was just filling Steve Perry's shoes, but without the same level of creative control or respect. He'd later say in interviews that the band was not a real democracy. It was the Neal Schon and Jonathan Cain show. They were used to running things a certain way in Journey, and they brought that dynamic into Bad English. Waite felt like his own artistic identity was being erased. He had been a successful solo artist, but now he was just, quote-unquote, the singer for Neal Schon and Jonathan Cain's new project. The power dynamics were all over the frickin' place. You had two guys from one massive band, two guys from another, and it just created factions. It was not five guys all for one. It was more like 2 + 2 + 1. And the touring did not help. Living on the road magnifies every little annoyance, every little personality clash. And these guys had very different personalities. Waite was more that moody, artistic type. Neal Schon, a guitar hero, a melodic, technical virtuoso who loved to let it rip. Cain, the seasoned pro, the master songwriter and arranger. The chemistry that looked so great on stage was apparently a different story backstage. And the other members, Ricky Phillips and Dean Castronovo, were caught all in the middle. Phillips had history with Waite from the Babies, but he was also a professional trying to make the best of a huge opportunity. Castronovo, he was the new guy, the youngest one, just trying to keep up with these rock titans. Despite the internal turmoil, they had to make a follow-up album. The pressure was immense. How do you follow up a multi-platinum debut with a #1 smash hit? The band went back in the studio in 1991 to record their second album, which they ominously titled Backlash. The title itself tells you everything you need to know. It was a reaction to their own success. They wanted to prove that they were a real rock band, not just the When I See You Smile guys. And so the album was intentionally heavier, more guitar-driven. They wanted to get away from the syrupy ballad that had made them household name. The recording sessions for Backlash were a nightmare. Fun was gone. The band was arguing over everything, the musical direction, songwriting, the production. Felt like a job, and a miserable one at that. Waite was pulling in one direction, wanting something more authentic and raw. Schon and Cain were pulling in another, sticking to that polished arena rock formula. It was just a big tug of war. Waite had described the period as pure misery, saying he just wanted out. Felt the band had no soul, that it was just prefab project designed by the record company. Spontaneity and joy of making music had been replaced by business obligations and ego battles. He felt creatively suffocated. He said he'd be in the studio and it felt like there were just too many producers, with everyone having this conflicting opinion on how things should sound. And while they're fighting amongst themselves, the entire music world was changing under their feet. It was 1991. And sadly, in so many of my videos, I've got to talk about this little city called Seattle. You got Nirvana coming out, releasing Nevermind, Pearl Jam, and the whole slick, polished, big hair rock scene that Bad English embodied was about to just be completely wiped off the map. Suddenly, bands that looked and sounded like Bad English were seen as dinosaurs, part of the old guard, the corporate rock machine that grunge was rebelling against. Even though we could all see in hindsight that grunge itself became a corporate rock machine, but digress. Authenticity, though, was the new currency. And a band that seemed as manufactured as Bad English, fighting over a Diane Warren ballad, was the furthest thing from authentic. So Backlash gets released in 91, and it landed with a thud. Had a top 30 hit with Straight to Your Heart, but it was a massive commercial disappointment compared to the debut. The momentum was gone. The music scene had moved on. The band that was supposed to be the next big thing just a year or two earlier was now struggling to even stay relevant. The failure of the second album was the final nail in the coffin. There was no reason to keep going. The money wasn't as good, and it was just no fun. And the breakup was not some big explosive public event. It was just a quiet fizzle. According to interviews, John Waite basically just walked away. He was done. He had a conversation with the band, management, and said he just couldn't do it anymore. No big farewell tour, dramatic press conference. They just stopped. One day Bad English was a band, and the next day it wasn't. Waite would later say that leaving the band felt like a huge weight being lifted off his shoulders. Called the whole experience a painful mistake. Said it was artistically a dead end. He felt the band stood for everything that he was against. Corporate, soulless music. Looking back, well, it's a classic story of a supergroup gone wrong. The very thing that made them super, the fame and history of the previous bands, is what ultimately destroyed them. They were never a gang of kids starting out in a garage, united against the world. They were a collection of established, successful musicians with their own egos, their own way of doing things, their own artistic visions, so to speak. And those visions just did not align. Waite wanted to be a raw rock singer. Schon and Cain wanted to continue the epic, polished sound of Journey. They were trying to mix oil and water. So after the breakup, everyone went their separate ways. What happened next is very telling. John Waite went back to his solo career, making music that was much closer to his heart. Neal Schon and Jonathan Cain eventually reunited with some members of Journey and continued to tour successfully for decades. With Dean Castronovo, the drummer, from Bad English, eventually joining them. Ricky Phillips later joined the classic rock band Styx. It's almost like Bad English was a temporary stopgap for everybody. The side project that got way bigger than anyone expected and then collapsed under its own weight. It proved that you could put all the right ingredients in a bowl, but you can't force chemistry. You can't manufacture a soul. And for John Waite, the experience was so negative that he has consistently spoken about it with a level of bitterness for decades. It wasn't just a band that broke up. For him, it was a creative and personal prison that he was lucky to escape. Perfect storm of bad timing, mismatched egos, and the suffering pressure of a #1 hit that they didn't even want.
Like, subscribe,